Her murder shocked all of Britain. Everyone knew who the killer was. She had sought help from the police, provided evidence, and testified herself, but the killer was still granted bail. Who was responsible for this? In her diary, she predicted the tragedy and tried to protect herself. However, in the end, fate played a cruel joke on her. She was stabbed 71 times, her life cut short. But justice prevailed. Her resilience and courage completed her mission. She even managed to change the law, protecting victims of abuse just like her. So what exactly happened back then? Let's travel back to 1984 in Britain to review this heartbreaking case. Lancashire, in the south of the Irish Sea, was located in northwest England. In its early days, it was relatively poor and underdeveloped. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the cotton industry developed rapidly, becoming the largest textile industrial area in all of Britain. The Industrial Revolution originated in this region in the 18th century. After the 19th century, the coal mining industry emerged. By 1971, Lancashire had become the most populous county in England after Greater London. As of 2021, Lancashire's population also ranked 8th among the 48 ceremonial counties of England. The protagonist of today's story, Jane Clough, was born here in 1984. She was the middle child, with a brother 3 years older and a sister 2 years younger. Her father, John, was a technician for a railway company, and her mother, Penny, was a nurse. Her parents were loving, and the siblings got along well. Her childhood was wonderful and happy. Jane was the best student among the 3 children and the most well-liked. She worked hard at everything she did. In her father John's words, Jane was very caring, perhaps from watching her mother help and care for others since she was young. Jane also wanted to become a nurse when she grew up. In 2007, she successfully completed her training at Blackpool, Victoria Hospital's A&E department, becoming a nurse. With her enthusiasm, Jane excelled in her department. Her colleagues all liked her, including one person who will appear often later, Tara.
She was a wonderful, amazing nurse. You would aspire to be like her.
Among her male colleagues, there was also one person who captured Jane's heart. His name was Jonathan Vass. He was an ambulance technician at the hospital, primarily responsible for work on the ambulance, including patient assessment and emergency medical care, such as stopping bleeding, CPR, and so on. He might also need to respond to emergencies like traffic accidents. Jonathan was born in April 1980 in the small town of Luton, Bedfordshire. In 1984, his family moved to Lancashire. He loved working out. At 1.89 meters, 6 feet 2, tall with a muscular build, he was the center of attention wherever he went. He had previously worked as a nightclub bouncer. To further enhance his physique, he started using steroids. This drug can increase muscle mass and strength, but it is considered illegal and unethical. Abuse can cause harm to the human body. The impression Jonathan gave was that of a big guy who loved to joke, but he wasn't very good at it, often making things awkward. This led most colleagues to think he was a bit dense. But Jane was the only one who saw him differently. She found Jonathan friendly, humorous, and charming. He always made her laugh. He was exactly like her dream guy. The two of them worked together frequently, often coordinating tasks, and they worked together very well. Over time, sparks flew between them, and they began dating in secret. Why did they have to be secretive? After all, the hospital didn't explicitly forbid colleagues from dating each other. Actually, it was all Jonathan's idea. He said he didn't want colleagues to find out and tease them. Well, can you guess why Jonathan wanted to keep it a secret? Because he was a liar. He was skilled at manipulating women. When he first met Jane, he intentionally got close to her because Jane looked naive and kind, like she would be easy to deceive. In reality, Jonathan had already been married for 2 years and had 2 children, the eldest not yet 5. His wife Joanne was also a nurse. Jonathan planned to reveal the truth only after Jane had completely fallen for him, forcing Jane to accept his marital status. He first wooed Jane with sweet talk, and during their relationship, gradually revealed his situation. After dating for 4 months, Jonathan felt the time was right. He came clean about being married and having 2 children. He added that his wife had been unfaithful to him, cheating on him twice, and that they were currently separated. He was lucky to have met Jane. Otherwise, he would have struggled to move on. After saying this, he paused waiting for Jane's reaction so he could plan his next words. Jane was stunned after hearing this. She shook her head, unable to accept it. At this moment, Jonathan made a timely promise, saying he would definitely get a divorce and then spend the rest of his life with Jane. Looking at the man before her, Jane wavered and believed Jonathan's lies, falling deeper into the love trap he had set. In reality, Jonathan's wife had not cheated. He had fabricated the entire story. In this round, Jonathan was very pleased with his victory. When meeting Jane's parents, his central message was that Jane wouldn't suffer with him. He wasn't short on money. This made Jane's mother, Penny, very uncomfortable. She felt Jonathan was unreliable, a bit like a con artist, showing off his wealth upon first meeting the parents. Coupled with Jonathan's marital situation, Jane's parents worried their daughter had met the wrong person. But it was just worry. They didn't interfere too much. After all, young people falling madly in love is all too common. The parents didn't want to force their daughter. They believed Jane would one day see him for who he truly was. But they didn't know that Jonathan's scheming went far beyond this. After 10 months of dating, in early 2008, he successfully moved into Jane's small house where she lived alone, located in Bear Village, Lancashire, not far from her parents' home. Jane thought her new life was about to begin, but what awaited her was an even bigger lie. When they first moved in together, they were like a happy young couple. Jane was filled with joy. She was only thinking about waiting for Jonathan to finalize his divorce, and everything would fall into place. After all, at that moment, on a legal level, she was the other woman. The thought of it made her heart ache. But thinking back, it seemed like Jonathan hadn't mentioned the divorce since that first time. She had to ask him clearly, but every time she was about to speak, Jonathan would either avoid the topic or get angry, acting like a completely different person. After getting angry, he would apologize to Jane, not forgetting to make up lies. He said he'd been very stressed lately. His wife often worked night shifts, and there was no one to look after the children at night. The children were truly pitiful, but he was afraid Jane would overthink, so he didn't know how to bring it up. Jane was inherently a kind and naive person. She felt that adult problems shouldn't involve the children, so she encouraged Jonathan to go home and take care of his kids. She even praised Jonathan, calling him a responsible father. So in the end, when would the divorce happen? She never managed to ask. And Jonathan gained another reason to frequently go home. In truth, Jonathan had been planning this move for a long time. He was on good terms with his wife and needed to go home regularly. Otherwise, he would arouse his wife's suspicion. His family knew nothing of Jane's existence. Just like that, Jonathan lived a couple's life with Jane, while simultaneously, by his wife and children's side, he played the part of a proper married man. Recently, he found another reason not to go home, claiming he had to work night shifts. But in reality, he had hooked up with another woman, Yvonne, who lived 27 kilometers, 17 miles, from Jane's house. During that time, Jonathan got a new car, which was said to have been bought for him by Yvonne. However, Jane didn't notice these changes. Instead, she believed Jonathan loved her more than before, because at every moment, she would receive messages and calls from him. Where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? It was as if he didn't want to miss a single second. In fact, his messaging Jane day and night was just to find out if Jane was with any other guys. But Jane always saw the good side of people, and Jonathan exploited exactly that. Jane, who was kept in the dark, was still dreaming of starting a family with Jonathan and having a baby. She didn't know that Jonathan was plotting an even more frantic control over her. He not only went to Jane's good friend Tara to rant, but also went to Jane's parents' house to complain, his goal being to embarrass Jane in front of her loved ones, to make everyone stay away from her and isolate her.
He used to come up without Jane's knowledge and try and tell us schoolboy type tales on what Jane had done. Do you know Jane did this? Do you know Jane did this? I don't want to know.
What Jonathan didn't expect was that his actions only triggered alarms for Jane's friends. Her friends all warned Jane to be careful of Jonathan. But Jane didn't take it to heart at all. Not only was she not angry, she even told Jonathan about her friends' warnings. After Jonathan found out, he didn't dare be careless anymore. He began stalking Jane, controlling her time outside, Even if she occasionally went out for lunch with colleagues or returned to her parents' house at night, he would appear without warning and then leave, claiming he was worried, when in reality, it was to satisfy his terrifying need for control. When he discovered that no one around Jane liked him, his mentality changed. He began to speak with his fists. At first, he only hit her face. Later, he hit her everywhere. Jane had to go to work every day, so it was only a matter of time before she was found out. One day, when an out-of-season scarf appeared around Jane's neck, Tara discovered the bruises under her scarf, covering her neck and chest. Tara was shocked for less than a second, but then felt it was expected. After all, in her eyes, Jonathan had never been a good person. It was just a pity Jane was in too deep.
She told me that he was being abusive.
From then on, Jane changed. The once happy, vibrant young nurse became quiet and melancholic. But despite this, she was still unwilling to leave Jonathan. She was truly in love. Not only did she not break up with him, she even hoped to use a child to continue this relationship. In January 2009, Jane got pregnant. She had the child she wished for, but the arrival of the child gave Jane's parents mixed feelings. They couldn't accept handing their daughter over to such a man. But Jane was resolute. She had been blinded by so-called true love. But an illusion is, after all, an illusion. Reality forced her to wake up. After she became pregnant, Jonathan didn't change at all. Instead, his need for control grew stronger, his sexual demands frequent, exploiting her like a predatory animal. After repeated instances of violence, Jane's love for Jonathan gradually faded. Finally, one day, she bravely refused him. When she was over 7 months pregnant, she clearly refused to be intimate. But Jonathan acted like a beast, brutally raping Jane 7 times within the next 5 weeks, completely disregarding Jane's and the baby's health. Jane was heartbroken, but she kept waiting. She held on to one belief. Jonathan was just sick. Only their unborn child could change him and save everything. However, this was just another, even crueler, illusion. In November, her daughter Imogen was born. But 6 weeks later, Jonathan violently raped Jane for the 8th time, even in front of their newborn daughter. He didn't treat Jane as a person at all, only as a tool for his release. Jane completely broke down. She wanted to escape this pathological man. To protect her newborn daughter, she moved back to her parents' house and told her parents Jonathan's true colors. Perhaps out of shame, she only revealed a part of it, like him hitting her, cursing at her, etc. As for the more heinous sexual assaults, she kept those hidden. Fortunately, Jane's parents sensed something was wrong. They encouraged Jane to break up with Jonathan completely. So, she gathered her courage and broke up with Jonathan, demanding he move out of her house. Jonathan was furious about this. He wanted to regain control of Jane's life and was very confident he could, because he knew well that although Jane might no longer trust him, she still loved him. 3 days after Jane left, Jonathan began sending text messages. On the surface, he was begging Jane to come home, but in reality, he was threatening her. We can see this from the content of his messages. No matter what problems there are, we have to be together. I love you, Jonathan. But being with you, I don't feel safe anymore. You've hurt me countless times, assaulted me, made me cry. I'm afraid of you. I love you too, but why did you run to your parents? Don't worry, I won't kill you and I won't hit you. Seeing that last line, Jane's heart skipped a beat. Remembering Jonathan's violent face, she knew this man was capable of anything. She was most afraid for her daughter's safety, so she replied with a slightly softer tone. You pushed me, grabbed me, tore my clothes. This is domestic violence. If you go see a doctor, I'll come home. Jonathan instantly seized on this. He began spinning lies, telling Jane, actually, the reason I haven't contacted you these past few days is because I went to see a doctor. The doctor advised I need care and companionship. Looking at the daughter in her arms, Jane's kind nature kicked in again. She wanted to make one last effort for her daughter to have a complete family. So she moved back in. Unsurprisingly, within a few days, Jonathan violently raped Jane for the 9th time. This time, Jane was resolute. She not only moved back to her parents' house, but also confessed everything to her parents. To completely break free from Jonathan, with her parents' encouragement and support, Jane reported Jonathan to the police. On November 29, 2009, Jane went to the Lancashire Constabulary and accused Jonathan of assault and rape. She also provided evidence. The police arrested Jonathan that same day, although Jonathan pleaded not guilty and even tried to twist the facts. As the investigation deepened, the police found the evidence to be conclusive. They also determined Jane to be a credible witness. The police immediately brought a total of 13 charges against Jonathan and remanded him in custody to await trial. At the same time, the hospital suspended him from his job. Without Jonathan's control, Jane felt relieved and free. It seemed like her increasingly peaceful life was returning. 12 days later, the case was heard at Burnley Crown Court. In court, Jonathan submitted a bail application, although it was strongly opposed by the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, CPS. Jane seemed to have a sixth sense, feeling extremely uneasy about Jonathan's bail. Once this person was released, he would definitely retaliate against her. The police understood Jane's worries and were closely monitoring Jonathan's bail application. After the application was rejected twice, they happily assured Jane that Jonathan would not get out. After all, out of 3 chances, 2 had been rejected. Jane was also happy, but it turned out celebrating prematurely was wrong. Judge Simon approved Jonathan's 3rd bail application on the condition that he not contact Jane and not go near Jane's home. But everyone knew the probability of Jonathan complying was very low. But Jane had no right to appeal. The objections from the police and the CPS could only serve as recommendations, so they could only watch helplessly as Jonathan was released. Although Jonathan was kicked out by his wife and was living at his parents' house 48 kilometers, 30 miles from Jane's, Jane always felt Jonathan would come for her. This feeling was like being trapped in a massive nightmare she couldn't wake up from. It made her break down and led her to develop an anxiety disorder. The second court hearing was set for April 2010. During these months, Jane didn't dare go out and kept her house locked. The front door had 2 locks. If she absolutely had to go out for something, she would have family and friends accompany her. An invisible pressure was suffocating her. Jane's family stated,
"We just broke down in tears. We couldn't believe it. It makes you wonder, what on earth does it take to keep a victim safe?"
A decision that I will never, ever understand or forgive.
To alleviate the deep unease in her heart, she started keeping a diary, recording her fear of Jonathan, while also firmly believing that Jonathan would eventually be brought to justice. Jane finally awaited the second hearing. But because Jonathan refused to plead guilty, the trial was delayed until October. This meant Jane had to wait another 6 months. On May 26th, she provided her testimony again, as required, and stated her intention to testify against Jonathan in court next time. What worried her most now was that her maternity leave was almost over. She had to return to work at the hospital in late June. The drive from home to the hospital was only 7.6 kilometers, 4.7 miles. And she had to pass Jonathan's current residence, a friend Fleetwood. Jane was worried. She had to ensure her safety on the commute. After much thought, Jane decided to drive to work and have her colleague Tara wait for her in the hospital parking lot to walk to the office together. She also learned a piece of news. In February 2010, Jonathan, while on bail, had secretly returned to the hospital to work as a security guard. But after less than 3 weeks, he was fired due to a complaint. Jane returned to her job as scheduled. Besides her parents, she now had support from colleagues and friends. Jane's condition improved day by day, and her confidence grew. But only she knew that her inner fear had never disappeared. She always felt Jonathan would come for her. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, back in May, when Jonathan learned Jane would testify against him, he had already made a plan. To avoid prison, he would stop at nothing. At first, to avoid drawing attention, Jonathan behaved very well. Every day, besides eating and sleeping, he was at the gym. There were no signs of him disturbing Jane or her family. But in reality, he was waiting. He felt that losing his job, being kicked out by his wife, and facing prison time was all Jane's fault. This woman had to pay the price. As for the bail conditions, he had long forgotten them. He had been secretly monitoring Jane's social media accounts, watching her movements. Previously, Jane had been staying at home, so he didn't dare make a rash move. But ever since Jane started working, he had been following her. This continued for several weeks, so he knew exactly what time Jane left home and what time she arrived at the hospital. He was well aware, of course. He also noticed Jane seemed very cautious, always having someone with her. His frustration led him to increase his dosage of steroids. Finally, after Jane posted about a long-awaited night out, he couldn't take it anymore. On July 23, 2010, Jane, in rebuilding her life, tried going out at night for the first time. With Tara, she attended an event called Girls' Night Out. She had a great time that night, and because of this, Jane felt life was gradually getting better. Anything was possible.
She was so excited, and we had a great time. She felt like, I think, the old Jane before it all happened. The next morning we went for breakfast and I dropped her off at home, and my lasting memory of her is waving goodbye, and she was so happy. And then that was the last time I saw her.
Her confidence led her colleagues to believe she no longer needed someone to meet her in the parking lot. And Jonathan keenly spotted this vulnerability. On July 25th, at 7:30 p.m., Jane left for her night shift as usual. Today was another small breakthrough for her. She hadn't asked a colleague to wait for her in the parking lot. She was going to walk that stretch of the parking lot by herself. Just as she was happily heading to the hospital, Jonathan, armed with a large knife about 7.5 centimeters, 3 inches long, also set out. At 7:45, Jonathan arrived near the hospital first. He parked his car in an alley a few hundred meters from the hospital, then unloaded his bicycle from the car, rode it into the hospital parking lot, and hid. He knew very well that Jane would appear in just a few minutes. At 8:16, Jane arrived safely at the hospital. As she parked her car and walked towards the hospital entrance, perhaps forgetting something, she suddenly turned around midway and walked back. This caused her to run right into Jonathan, who was following her. The scene that had played out in her mind countless times was really happening. When Jonathan demanded Jane drop the charges, Jane fearlessly refused. After speaking, she prepared to flee, but as soon as she turned, she was caught by Jonathan. What followed was a stabbing pain in her body. Jane, much smaller than Jonathan, was powerless to resist. Before she could even scream, she slowly became unable to move. After an unknown amount of time, loud shouts suddenly came from the parking lot. "Get in the car!" It turned out someone had arrived. This shout not only startled Jonathan into fleeing hastily, but also attracted the attention of a nearby resident, Norman Smart. His house's position overlooked the entire parking lot. When he looked out the window, he saw Jane lying on the ground, bleeding profusely. Just as he was calling the police, he witnessed a scene he would never forget. A man walked up to Jane, pulled her arm, turning Jane from her side onto her back. Then the man slowly knelt down and forcefully slashed at Jane's neck. Afterward, the man strode away. Yes, Jonathan had returned to inflict 2 fatal cuts. When Jane was taken to the emergency room, her colleagues couldn't even recognize her. It wasn't until they saw her ID badge. Everyone regretted not waiting for her in the parking lot. As for who the killer was, everyone knew in their hearts. No one else would have hurt Jane. There were 19 stab wounds on Jane's neck alone, the longest being 13.5 centimeters, 5.3 inches. In the end, Jane died from her injuries. The police who arrived quickly were also shocked by the scene. The level of violence left them speechless. Detective Inspector Neil Essene was very familiar with Jane. Back in court, he had opposed Jonathan's bail. When he learned Jane had a total of 71 stab wounds, he was deeply disturbed for a long time. Through the bloodstains at the scene, he discovered that Jane was still conscious. After Jonathan left the first time, she was trying to crawl back to her car. Considering Jonathan was now at large, the police were very worried he would launch a frenzied campaign of revenge. The danger level was extremely high, so they deployed a capture plan overnight, splitting into 4 teams to head to the gym, Jonathan's wife's house, and the homes of Jonathan's and Jane's parents. Meanwhile, after committing the crime, Jonathan drove aimlessly, fleeing until dawn. Suddenly, he stopped his car at a gas station, bought 2 cans of gasoline, and then drove towards Jane's parents' house because his daughter was there. On the morning of the 26th, at 7:30, police went on high alert because they had spotted Jonathan's car. Considering Jonathan was a large man, the police As Jonathan got out of the car to grab the gasoline cans, he hit him with a stun grenade. During the arrest, he was picky about the officers. Skinny ones wouldn't do, female ones even less so. When he saw a female officer among those arresting him, he immediately became extremely agitated, cursing and swearing. This also highlighted his attitude towards women. Police found 3 letters on Jonathan. One was addressed to Jane, stressing that he believed everything he did was just revenge, because Jane had pressed charges against him, causing him to lose everything. Another was to Jane's family, expressing that he couldn't bear to see Jane living happily with another man. The last letter was to Detective Inspector Neal, who investigated the sexual assault case. It was full of arrogance and insults, accusing Neal of knowing nothing about the facts, yet jumping to conclusions. Throughout his detention, Jonathan showed not the slightest hint of remorse, sadness, or regret. When police described Jane's autopsy report, he showed no expression. He was described as manipulative and extremely controlling. Inspector Neal stated, without a doubt, he will be spending a very long time in prison. Jane's death shocked the entire community. Hundreds gathered at St. Thomas's Church to bid Jane farewell. Jane's parents were especially emotional because Jane's injuries were so severe. Her wish to be an organ donor could not be fulfilled. In the end, her ashes were placed in the church graveyard under a cherry tree. At the same time, people began to question Judge Simon, who had released Jonathan. A few days later, the Judicial Communications Office issued a statement that Simon's actions complied with the Bail Act of 1976. Except in special circumstances, bail should be granted in all cases. Furthermore, Simon was not informed of any of Jane's concerns, nor was there any evidence that Jonathan would reoffend. Plus, Jonathan had been a healthcare worker of good character, so he agreed. Regarding this statement, Jane's parents, the police, and the CPS all raised strong objections. The law is unjust. I want to change the law. On October 7, 2010, the trial first opened at Preston Crown Court. In court, Jane's diary from before her death was made public. From beginning to end, there was only one main theme. She was afraid Jonathan would hurt her. We can take a brief look at the diary entries. January 15, 2010. I'm worried Jonathan will do something stupid, like try to find me. His time is running out. I don't believe he will just wait for a jury to send him to prison. I can't help but think he will take revenge on me. January 24, 2010. Oh God, when will this hell end? I know some people think I'm overreacting because they keep saying, if Jonathan was going to breach his bail, he would have done it already. But I don't believe that. I'm very scared. February 27, 2010. What is his plan? What is he going to do? I think if he doesn't do something to hurt me, we won't even go to trial. I still feel like he's going to show up. March 8, 2010. Today, I've been worried Jonathan will come and get me. If he is found guilty while he's out on bail, awaiting sentencing, he might even come and kill me. Is there any way to stop him? After reading this, we find Jane had long predicted her danger, but she was powerless. When Jonathan was free, she, in turn, became the prisoner, only daring to stay in her own home with the door locked, not daring to go anywhere alone. The irony is, the person who truly deserved to be locked up was let go by Judge Simon. In response, Judge Anthony, in the courtroom, did not make any comment on his colleague's actions. After Jonathan admitted his guilt and explained his motive, he announced that Jonathan's previous unresolved sexual assault charges would be left on file. He gave this explanation. The charges would not be erased. There was no doubt about the credibility of Jane's assault claims, but they would not be tried for now. They would be left on file. This is not the same as dropping the charges. When sentencing for the murder, the previous charges would be taken into consideration. The main reason for doing this was to consider the public interest, because Judge Anthony believed that under the law at the time, Jonathan would not receive additional prison time on top of the murder conviction. So compared to the murder, everything else seemed insignificant. Simply put, only the more serious crime of murder would be tried. The lesser crime of sexual assault would be ignored under the guise of leaving it on file, and this infuriated Jane's parents. They called Anthony's decision disgraceful. If the case isn't tried, what's the difference between leaving it on file and dropping it? Jonathan should have received additional punishment, convicted of both crimes. Now they were being told this was not in the public interest. They also firmly believed that if Jonathan had not been granted bail, but had been remanded for trial, then Jane would not have been harmed. When Jane gathered the courage to walk into the police station and entrust her safety to them, she never expected the legal system to fail her. First, Burnley Crown Court released Jonathan, and now Preston Crown Court was shelving the sexual assault case. They couldn't just stand by. On October 14th, before the verdict was announced, the elderly couple held a protest outside the court. More than 20 supporters wore Justice for Jane t-shirts and badges, holding homemade banners. Insignificant rape? I cannot rest in peace. Ultimately, Jonathan was sentenced to a mandatory life imprisonment, with eligibility for parole only after at least 30 years. This is reserved for extremely serious crimes. When he heard the result, he broke down, tears streaming. Of course, he was crying for himself. In a prison interview a year later, he remained unremorseful. At the time, he was suspected of being suicidal and was receiving treatment. Facing the camera, he expressed his feelings about Jane. I miss her. I feel empty, but I hate her. I hate her so much. I hope one day, when I get out, I can see my 3 children and be a part of their lives. However, a prison nurse nearby stated that Jonathan's eyes betrayed him. He felt no guilt inside. To this day, he still believes everything was Jane's fault. He would even privately gouge out Jane's eyes from newspapers. This wasn't because he didn't dare to look, but was his way of expressing hatred. After the documentary was broadcast, Jane's mother wrote a letter to the judge, who released Jonathan Simon, wanting him to know how absurd it was to grant Jonathan bail. It's worth mentioning that with Jonathan's imprisonment, Jane's parents' fight for their daughter had only just begun. They launched the Justice for Jane campaign to seek changes to the law, hoping the CPS could appeal a high court judge's decision to grant bail. An online petition gained over 12,000 signatures of support. The elderly couple also sought help from the Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, who also pledged his support. Finally, through everyone's combined efforts, the Legal Aid, Sentencing, and Punishment of Offenders Act, amending the Bail Act, was revised and took effect on March 1, 2012. It allows prosecutors to appeal a Crown Court judge's bail decision. In memory of Jane, this amendment is also widely known as Jane's Law. Besides the change to the bail law, Jane's parents also insisted the sexual assault case not be left on file. They finally achieved victory on July 4, 2012. From then on, murder charges would no longer supersede sexual assault charges. Those who commit both crimes will be charged with both offenses. Jane's father also stated he hoped Jonathan would be tried for the sexual assault so he would be recognized as a sex offender and placed on the sex offender register. Besides these, Jane's parents also helped establish Jane's Place, which, although established in Jane's memory, does not belong to them exclusively. It was jointly established by Places for People and the Filed Coast Women's Aid. It has 15 apartments, specifically providing refuge for women and children fleeing domestic violence. One of them, Jane's Place, was full just 3 weeks after opening, and there are many similar victims across the country. To this end, Jane's father, as a spokesperson, put public pressure on the authorities, requesting funding for other women's refuges facing closure and urging authorities to establish a stalker registry to register serial stalkers and domestic abusers nationwide. This petition has received over 164,000 signatures. Ultimately, Jane's mother Penny and father John, for their outstanding contributions, were successively named to the New Year Honors List and awarded the 5th class member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE. The New Year Honors List is an honors system published annually in the UK to recognize people who have made outstanding contributions in various fields. The Order of the British Empire is typically used to recognize contributions in community service, charity, public service, and other fields. In 2019, when Jean accepted the award from Prince William at Buckingham Palace, he said he was very pleased to be recognized. This confirms to us even more that the work we are doing is valuable. Everything we do in Jane's name is her legacy. She was an A&E nurse. She helped people every day. Now, in my view, she is still helping people. Alright, that's all for today's story. Please help support us with a like, comment, and subscribe. Your simple click is a great encouragement to me. See you next time.